Our next challenge is a focus on recycling. While the U.S. recycling rate lags the rest of the world, but improving it would create jobs, reduce landfill and transport costs, and ease the impact on the environment. So what will it take to double America's recycling rate in 5 years? To find out, please welcome my colleague from Fortune, Jennifer Reingold, and her panelists.
Good morning, everyone.
Green chairs.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm here with Adib from Sprint and David Steiner from Waste Management, as I like to call them, the makers and the takers. We are hopeful, and you, as both of your industries, have declared that the objective in terms of recycling is really to double where we are today. That's what we're going to work on later this afternoon. Is that really a practical goal? And let me start with a sort of broader question here, which is, everyone in this room assumes that recycling is a great thing and that it's also an economic thing. Can each of you sort of address that question from the perspective of your industries? Maybe let's start with you, Fareed.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to frame, why is a cell phone company worried about this? And I think that, the biggest thing is there's about 6 billion cell phone users in the world. There's about 1.6 billion new cell phones that are sold every year. So you're dealing with large numbers. And when you look at the problem, although cell phones are really small and most people don't really associate the recyclability or the remanufacturing capability of a phone, you really look at it and you say, the economies of scale, the numbers, the exponential numbers that come from putting 1.6 billion and growing phones in the ecosystem every year is a pretty big problem. And it's one that a lot of carriers around the world have recognized. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take those phones back from customers, a lot of which, probably like many of you, you take those phones every time you buy a new phone, you put your old one in a drawer somewhere or you discard it. And that can tend to be harmful. One, in the amount of energy and manufacturing materials that goes into these phones, there's a lot of precious metals in them, there's a lot of plastics and glass in them. And so recovering those devices and remanufacturing them is our key goal.
And are you doing that because you think it's nice to do, or are you doing it because you think you'll make money?
Well, I think both. And I think there's been kind of a theme that I've heard in the last couple of days from speakers, and that there's an enlightened piece to this where you can actually be socially responsible, but you can also save money. And we save about $1 billion a year. It's a pretty big number.
That's the current number?
In costs, yeah. And it continues to grow because, think about it. These phones cost about $500-600 a piece now, the ones that most people want. And we subsidize them for about $100 to $200. But, we would rather give someone a remanufactured product that we've put about $50 to $60 in cost in remanufacturing to a new like quality status than having to replace that phone with a $500-600 product. So if you multiply that by the millions of customers we all have, that turns into a pretty big number pretty quickly.
Okay. And David, why don't you take that from your end? So when we've gotten that phone out of the drawer and put it into some kind of a receptacle, what happens?
So that 1.6 billion phones, that covers the number in my house. What's everybody else doing?
By the way, David's a very good customer of Sprint's. They buy a lot of phones, so I have to be really nice to him.
Nice.
With the question being, can you double the recycling rates? Absolutely, you can double the recycling rates. But I always say, in order to really make progress, you've got to look at the three legs of the stool, right? You've got the consumer, you've got businesses, and you've got the government, right? And so if what you're going to try to do is double the recycling rate, you have to look at each material that you have, and you have to look at each of those three and say, what role do they play in it, right? And so remember years ago when we first started recycling, and you had to take your glass and put it in one bin, your paper and put it in another bin, your plastics and put them in a separate bin.
Still do that in New York.
Well, in New York you also drink 32-ounce Cokes, so
not for long.
You all are way behind the times. one of the things that happened is we started using what we call single stream technology, which means you can take all of those materials, put them in one bin, and we'll do the separation for you rather than you having to separate it. What happened? Well, when you did that, you saw recycling rates go up, oddly, by 50%. And so, what can you do at the consumer level to educate the consumer to make them understand what to do with those materials? And then look back at the businesses. Well, look, we are in the business of making money on recycling. And so we need to look at it and say, okay, when you take those materials, how can we make money out of those materials, whether it's recycling them or reusing them or taking them and turning them into energy or something like that. And you have to say, okay, what role can we play and how do you make something profitable? So one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately is recycling of glass. Glass by weight is the second largest commodity that we have after fiber. And so if you want to get to 50% recycling rates, you have to include glass in that number. We don't make any money at glass, and most of the glass doesn't get recycled.
And why is that? Why can't you make money at glass?
Because the glass, first off, it's very hard on that single stream recycling equipment, so it takes a lot of money to separate it. But then when you think about it, if someone wants to use recycled glass to make this, it's got a green stem and a blue top, right? We're collecting blue glass, green glass, brown glass, and once it all gets commingled together, you cannot make this blue glass, right? And so you've got to find an outlet for that glass once it's been commingled. And so, so you got to look at the business and say, okay, how do we understand how we can make money recycling glass? Because you can't get there if the consumer doesn't understand what they need to do and we can't make money on it. And then the third leg with the government. So, there's going to be some materials that just you can't get there without either a government subsidy or a government mandate.
Okay,
so in order to get there, you got to look at all three of those components and say what role do they play in doubling the recycling rate.
Okay, you guys are in control of the business element of this. What are you doing now that you weren't doing, let's say, 5 years ago, and what can you do in the next 5 years, keeping in mind, of course, that you're both running, you're with public companies and you need to actually make money. What's really exciting in terms of either technologically or psychologically in the way people are?
Yeah, I think first there's still a lack of education in most consumers. I think most people here, are sustainability experts in their respective industries, and I think most consumers still, they understand the value of recycling, but I don't think within our industries, respectively speaking, that there's a lot of education on what is it we're exactly doing. What we've tried to do is take a little bit of that legwork out from the customer's point of view, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate, but at the same time, we're also trying to incent. And one of the big things, one of the big things we're doing is every time a customer walks in and they're renewing their contract with Sprint, we actually offer them at the point of sale. We know what phone they're bringing in. We automatically, the representative, it's built into the computer system at the retail point of sale, it offers them a value for their old phone. So it really gets them over that hump of, do I take that phone back and put it in my drawer?
And are you paying that because you're trying to make money on that transaction, or are you paying it because you're trying to incentivize recycling?
Well, both. I mean, we have a...
So account, for example.
Well, for example, so you bring back your iPhone,
okay,
and it's a one generation old iPhone. We'll give you $125 for it, and you're buying the new phone for $200. So
and then you're going to resell that phone.
Well, what we do is we remanufacture the phone. We send it to one of our key partner manufacturers, and then what they do is they spend, on average, it can be anywhere from $50 to $75, because a lot of the times the remanufacturing process is very much just cosmetic. And so we're just, fixing the glass, or we're fixing some plastics, and then we're putting it back in the ecosystem and replacing phones that may be being used for insurance reasons. A customer may have damaged their phone or dropped it in the pool, and it's damaged beyond repair, and they want a new phone, but they don't want to pay $400 or $500 for a new phone. We go ahead and give them that.
And so how many phones have you collected in this way?
Well, we collect 9 million phones. On average, we collect millions a year. We buy back.
And how many phones do you sell?
Well, we buy back 4 out of 10 transactions, we buy back a phone.
4 of 10.
Yeah, so it's a pretty good rate, but again, we can
and
double that
And is that,
rate.
in terms of the industry, is that a a good rate?
We're leading in the industry, actually globally, and when you look at that rate, it's pretty high. And then 9 out of 10 phones we can actually remanufacture. So if you look at the numbers, they actually economically play out to be quite profitable in the long run.
So your goal is to eventually take back 90% of phones? Is
That's
that
right. By 2017, Dan Hesse, our CEO, has set this very strong goal that it's probably one of the most difficult goals that you would have to achieve in the industry, because getting to a 90% recyclability rate is going to be quite difficult. But it pushes the organization and it incentivizes the company to make sure that we hit it, because we have this kind of corporate level goal that we want to hit.
Okay. So if we go back sort of to the broader issue of responsibility and sort of how to incentivize consumers and so forth, is it possible for example, the two of you to work together and come out with some more consumer education that's not specifically about your product, let's say, but that you can work together on, or even within the industries, are you able, I mean, this is a competitive advantage for you to say we're doing this, right? So I'm going to assume that maybe you don't want to share that competitive advantage with your competitors. On the other hand, if you guys are really serious about trying to change the way recycling is perceived in this country, you've got to do something bigger. Is there anything sort of inter-industry or within industry that's out there?
Well, just hearing what they're doing with the phones, it goes back to what I talked about before of trying to get the three stools of the three legs of the stool. The best way to educate the consumer is to say, we'll pay you $125 for that phone,
yeah,
right?
That's a good education.
And that really gets people's attention, right? We've done something with recycling called Recycle Bank, where if you recycle, you get rewards, right? Look, I've got 3 boys, and the best way for them to learn is to be excited about learning, right? And the best way to get folks to change their behavior is to get them to be excited about changing their behavior. And the best way to get them excited is to make it economically beneficial for them. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things we can do to increase the education of the consumer. But that's only going to go, it's like I say, that's only going to go so far. Increasing the education might get you more material. It might get you a lot more phones. Some of those phones are going to be able to be remanufactured. Some of them aren't. And so what do you do with those phones, right? And so, what I've started to understand over the last few years is a big part of it is what materials do you actually want and what materials do you not want, right? I mean, and then what do you do with those materials? So that plastic bottle, we used to think about it as you reflake it and you put it back into a plastic bottle, right? That's a great use. That's recycling. We've sort of changed the definition of recycling. You can also take that plastic bottle and you can create oil out of it, and we have an investment in a company that does that. And so when you change the outlets...
How did that even come about, and what exactly are you able to do?
Yeah, so, well, what we're trying to do is to change the outlets for the material, right?
So it's not just about a landfill, or it's what is its next use, right?
Exactly right. And so, we looked at it a few years ago, and we looked at all the materials we put into the landfill. And if we could take all those materials and do something with them, there's about $12 billion of value there, and we're burying it every day. I mean, that doesn't, from a business point of view, that doesn't make much sense, right? And so what can we do to extract value out of that? And so we started with conversion technologies, right? What can we do to take that material and convert it into something that might be more useful? Because once it's all cross-contaminated, it can't be recycled. So what do you do with it? So we built a plant in San Antonio where we take your standard everyday garbage, 1 truck, 1 can. So not 3 trucks picking up 3 different types of materials and creating its own carbon footprint, but 1 truck with 1 can. You put it all into 1 can. We take it, we turn it into pelletized fuel. Pelletized fuel, we can run BTU content from about 7,000 to 13,000 BTUs, and so different types of users of coal need different levels of BTU. We can modify that to give them whatever BTU content they want. In San Antonio, we're doing about 600 tons a day. We expect to do about 1,000 tons a day. We're doing our second plant in Philadelphia. That'll do about 1,000 tons a day.
And is this an investment for you, or is this actually making money?
Well, look, the first plant is not making money. The second plant should make money. We learned a lot in the first plant. You don't just build these things, throw the garbage in, and fuel comes out of the back end. You've got to understand how you have to separate the materials and then how you compress those materials into coal. And so what it does into pelletized fuel, and so what it does is it creates this pellet that you can vary the BTU content, and it burns with about 10% of the particulates of coal. So if you're talking about clean coal, it is the cleanest coal
Wow.
you can possibly have. That changes the game.
Yep.
Because now you're able to say to the consumer, I don't have to educate you. It goes back to what I talked about when we first started recycling. They had to separate it. You want to get above 50%, you're going to have to get the consumer to do a meticulous job of separating that material. Do you really think that can happen? But if we could make money on unseparated material, then you don't have to make that happen. And that's why I say you've got to look, in order to get above 50%, you've got to look at what can you do with the consumer, how can the business make money, and then if you can't get there in those two ways, how can the government help to either educate the consumer or subsidize the product?
I wanted to address the competitor piece, and it's kind of a sensitive piece for a lot of people in a lot of industries. And I think that, we do see that it is a competitive advantage for us. I mean, we look at the Newsweek ranking every year, and we take pride in the fact we went from number 5 to number 3 as the greenest company in America. But, and AT&T and Verizon and some of our bigger competitors aren't even in the, they're lagging along in the rankings. But I think if you really look at the problem we're trying to solve from a corporate social responsibility standpoint and a sustainability standpoint, we have 56 million customers. We alone can do everything we need to do to have these large goals. But I think we also need the industry to come along with it, right? And I think, a lot of our competitors, we've been, I think, somewhat of an instigator in the marketplace to really have other big carriers look at the problem and say, hey, we.
And if people actually come to you, are you willing to meet with them?
Yeah, we've talked to other carriers internationally. Obviously, we don't necessarily directly talk to our competitors on it because we do have some art and science of what we've done that we do want to keep a competitive advantage. But we do work through our industry forums. And I think that, we have an industry forum called CTIA. We work through that to try to set broader goals for our industry and try to kind of bring everybody along. And, there's a lot of areas where our competitors have been doing a lot of great work as well. So I think that if you really want to solve the problem, if you really want to look at it in a global perspective, and especially when you're talking about 6 billion cell phone users and 1.6 billion phones a year, you got to get more than 56 million customers.
Yeah, we got a long way to go. I want to open up to questions. We don't have too much time left. I can't see anything though. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question?
Preferably with the time left, yes or no questions.
We can go a little over. It's good. Yeah. And please identify yourself. Is there anybody? Yes? Okay.
Hi. Thomas Odenwald from SAP. I have a question. Are there examples where you, based on the knowledge that you gain through the remanufacturing or end-of-life process, where you went back to the manufacturer and tried to give advice or influence the design process of those devices?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What we found is, so in my role, I own everything from the device selection and the procurement up front of the billions of dollars we buy from the Apples and the Samsungs and the HTCs of the world, all the way through the engineering and the deployment and the reverse logistics and remanufacturing. So we're organized a little bit differently, purposefully, because the life cycle of the product is very important. We're typically reverse logistics and remanufacturing organizations within a lot of companies. They're kind of the non-sexy groups, operation groups I call them, that kind of get put in the back burner, and they don't get a lot of C-suite attention in most companies. And I think we kind of reorganized so that I have to pay attention to the birth and the rebirth of the product. Now, my teams, what they do is they've actually found that the person who's responsible for reverse logistics always talks to the person who's doing the procurement and the product development. And the reason why is because they find that every time we have a product that come out, let's say it's a phone that had a lot of customers bring it in because the USB charger kept breaking on it when customers would plug in the power supply. We actually found through the remanufacturing process that if the manufacturer would have soldered those points, a couple of additional areas on those points, that they wouldn't have had as many problems. So you only pick that up when the remanufacturers and the reverse logistics people talk to the people at the front of the line and then take that back to the manufacturing. So there's lessons like that we learn every day that you typically wouldn't have those dots connected that way because in most companies you kind of have this life cycle process broken up into compartments.
But it's a great question. Years ago, the makers of the Barbie doll came to us and said, we'd like to see the Barbie doll be able to be recycled. Tell us what kind of materials we can put into it to make it recycled. And so we helped them with that. I always like to say, when I got this job, I never thought I'd be giving Barbie plastic surgery, but I got to do that. So we do that, but not enough, right? We talked about it earlier, that this bottle and the way you can recycle this bottle. If we could get involved in the manufacturing side, now look, our input might be totally impractical to selling the material, but
Right.
we should be working with our customers to say, if you want to make that, whatever the product is, more recyclable, here's what you can help us do. And so get our design teams together with their design teams to understand, how do you make something more recyclable?
I would love to see an example of that we can write about in Fortune or talk about up here next time. Thank you both very, very much, Fareed and David. Oops.